All those opposed will say no.
No.
The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. With that, I recognize Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank both the Chairman and Ranking Member for your hard work pulling this bill together and for the cooperative manner in which it has gone forward. There are a number of very good provisions that are included in this bill. A number of different pieces of legislation I've introduced that have been incorporated. The underlying bill includes language from the SHAME Act, which I had introduced, which imposes sanctions on Chinese officials for rape, for forced abortions, for forced sterilization. In addition to that, there were 4 of my amendments in the manager's package that this committee just adopted. The Taiwan SOS bill, letting Taiwan display their symbols of sovereignty. That is an important reaffirmation of our strong support for Taiwan. In addition to that, the Secure IP Act, which provides for a list of the corporate officers of companies stealing U.S. intellectual properties. In addition to that, an explicit finding, a genocide finding that explicitly acknowledges the genocide targeted at the Uyghurs, and finally an amendment that requires a report on the effect that potentially re-entering the JCPOA would have on Iran-China cooperation. I think all of those were significant positive improvements, and I want to thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for working with me and my staff to include them. I don't have an additional amendment at this point to call up.
I thank the Senator for his work, which has been incorporated, and thank him for allowing us to proceed. Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and to Senator Risch for working to incorporate so many amendments that I and colleagues have produced, including 9 of my amendments, 3 of which address Taiwan, which I think is very important in our efforts to support democracy around the world. I do want to call up today Merkley number 3, which addresses the China Censorship Monitor and Action Group. And if this gets into the main bill, Mr. Chairman, it would be my inclination to drop the markup on the standalone bill, but I think this is the right content to be included in the broader bill, since that is the place where will likely go to the floor. And I want to thank Corey Gardner, who worked on this with me last time, and for Marco Rubio for his partnership this time around. We have all seen the stories of China exercising influence on U.S. companies in all kinds of ways, from basketball to film to hotels, in regard to their expression of opinion about China's activities in the world. What this amendment does, and what the broader bill does, is it sets up an action group that will take and have an interagency process to monitor all of this Chinese influence on U.S. freedom of speech, particularly in the corporate sector. And then it requires an extensive report to be delivered back to us within a year to detail the activities and a strategy for how we should be responding. And it sets up this working group and sunsets it after 5 years. We can decide then if it needs to be taken forward. That is the amendment, and it incorporates essentially the content of S 413.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. I support. This actually was, in essence, is the subject of the freestanding bill that we had prepared for today's markup, and I understand your desire to, in essence, take that and include it in this legislation.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Rubio, who's worked on this with Senator Merkley.
Yeah, and I appreciate it coming forward and being moved on this way, and I look forward, I think we're going to learn even more about the outrages. We're already being censored. You can't produce a film in Hollywood today. No major motion picture in Hollywood today can have a angle to it that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like, because it won't be distributed in China, and they want to make the money over there. And we've got plenty of corporations who make millions, if not billions of dollars with access to the Chinese market. The price of that access and making that billions of dollars is to say nothing about the horrifying abuses. We have major corporations that are coming into this very building and lobbying against everything from bills dealing with the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims to anything that could undermine their ability to make money in China. So, but I think Americans are going to be startled to learn about how much of the content that they have access to in this country is tailored to meet the censorship standards of the Chinese Communist Party, who have leveraged the commercial value of that marketplace to inflict those conditions on Americans. And so I look forward to the results of the study because I think it'll be enlightening.
Any other comments on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
I think the Senator wants to offer an amendment, if I'm not mistaken. So before we get to that, is there any other comments? If not, I recognize Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the Chairman is aware, this particular amendment has been a subject of considerable discussion and negotiation. I'd hoped that Senator Merkley and I could reach common ground on this amendment. This amendment has similarities to an amendment and a bill that I've introduced and advocated for repeatedly called the Script Act, that is focused on the persistent pattern of censorship coming out of Hollywood. That as America produces movies, American movie producers have demonstrated a repeated willingness to censor our movies to please the Communist Party in China and the censors coming out of China. And working with Senator Merkley, I agreed in my amendment to add his language focusing on social media, education, travel, financial services, manufacturing, technology, telecommunication, internet infrastructure, expanding the scope beyond just Hollywood. So I added the language that Senator Merkley proposed. But nonetheless, we did not reach common ground, and so the difference between what I've introduced and what Senator Merkley's introduced is twofold. Number one, my amendment explicitly addresses the political censorship, and the political censorship from the Chinese Communist Party is particularly sensitive. It is their focus. My amendment defines political content and the political censorship as content that is considered sensitive by the Chinese Communist Party or the government of the People's Republic of China for political reasons, including issues related to human rights, freedom of expression, Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, and the Tiananmen Square massacre. Also concerning the repression of the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, and other religious and spiritual minorities, and the ongoing genocide of the Uyghurs, including through coercive birth prevention policies in Uyghur concentrated areas, such as forced abortions, involuntary sterilizations, and the involuntary implantation of contraceptives. Senator Merkley's language deletes all of that. I think it's a mistake to delete all of that. That is clearly a central concern for the Chinese Communist Party, and I think it's important that we focus the study in particular on their political censorship. The other thing that Senator Merkley's version deletes is the explicit focus on Hollywood, on films and television, and producing a list in particular of any United States company that has altered the content of a film in response to or in anticipation of a request from the Chinese Communist Party. And I think it is important in particular to provide the transparency what movies are being censored, what American movies are being censored, and Senator Merkley's amendment deletes that provision and instead lumps film in with everything else. I think we have a unique and serious problem with Hollywood being all too willing and even eager to play the role of censor for the Chinese Communist Party. And so accordingly, I call up my second-degree amendment, Cruz 1, which is a second-degree amendment to Merkley 3. And what the second-degree amendment does is simply goes back to the original language that includes focus on political issues, includes Tibet, includes the Falun Gong, includes the Uyghurs, includes the horrific human rights focus, and it also specifically calls for developing a public list and public reporting of what U.S. film companies are editing what movies at the request of the Chinese Communist Party. And so I would ask for a vote on the Cruz Second Amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Who's Senator Merkley?
Thank you. Let me point out several things. The list that my colleague refers to on political content is under a definition of political content, which was required because he uses the term political content later in his amendment. So it's a definitional presentation, not instruction for the report. Then that doesn't appear in our basic amendment because we don't use the term political comment. And then the second is, what we have done in this is said, we want to focus the attention on what the Chinese government is doing. So we want it to be comprehensive. And we list out all of the areas where freedom of expression is being impacted. Media, social media, film, education, travel, financial services, sports, entertainment, technology, telecommunications, internet infrastructure. Now, we ask for the report to include illustrative examples. Explain to us exactly what is being done by the Chinese. And that's to get to the sort of point that I certainly share, is we need to understand exactly what they're doing. Now, I think all of you have seen from various press reports that some of our hotels have changed their activities. And I'd be happy to give some examples of that. A group of our airlines have changed their activities, and we can give examples. Some of our famous retailers have changed the expressions they have on their products. Be happy to give examples. The NBA has changed its conduct, and I'd be happy to share. The point here is, this is about analyzing what China is doing across all of these categories, not to pick a particular category, film, and make it essentially what appears to be a direct effort to criticize the American film industry. We want the focus to be on what China is doing. If we were to have the same detail, we should have it, or if we were approaching it to say, let's single out just film and give these examples, well, why not how our universities have responded? Why not how our airlines have responded? Why not have our hotels? It's just, rather than being an attack on Hollywood, this is an analysis of what China's doing in all these sectors with an instruction for them to provide the examples of what's going on. So there will be the examples happening in all of these sectors. But I don't want to convert this bill in simply an attack on Hollywood. I'd invite Senator Cruz to introduce his own amendment separate to be considered if he wants to focus in that detail in that fashion.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
If I could respond to that, as I mentioned, I agreed with Senator Merkley to expand the scope of it. I agree that China is imposing restrictions on a host of areas, whether the NBA or otherwise. And so I think that was a positive suggestion from Senator Merkley that I agreed to. I do think we have a unique problem with Hollywood and Hollywood playing the role of censors. Senator Merkley asked, well, how are airlines or hotels different? Well, they're different because they're not content providers. Censorship is not the same sort of threat with an airline or hotel. There are certainly airlines and hotels that accede to pressure from communist China, but when it comes to censorship of creative output, that is something Hollywood is directly responsible for. And the principal difference between Senator Merkley's version and my version is whether or not we would produce a list of what movies are being censored as a result of pressure from communist China. It doesn't impose any penalties. It simply has transparency. Do the American people have a right to know what movies are being censored? We know, for example, that Top Gun 2, that they removed the patches from the back of Maverick's jacket because you had Taiwan and Japan there. The Communist Party of China didn't like Taiwan and Japan on the back of Maverick's jacket. And so Hollywood is telling America now Maverick, probably the greatest Navy recruiting film ever produced, is scared of the Chinese communists and changed his jacket not to offend them. We know that Bohemian Rhapsody, a fabulous biopic of Freddie Mercury, they edited out scenes of homosexual sex because the Chinese apparently were offended by them. I don't know how anyone tells the story of Freddie Mercury without acknowledging that he was gay. And yet Hollywood, those great social justice warriors, happily edited those scenes out to appease the Chinese communist censors. And so the question on this vote is, do we want a list so the American people can see what films are being censored at the request of the Chinese, or do we want to effectively help cover up for Hollywood and hide that list so the American people don't know? I think the answer should be in favor of transparency.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me, if I can, Senator Merkley, there may be other members who want to be recognized. Senator Card, and I'll come back to you as well. And Senator Card.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to put the amendment with Senator Merkley's proposal. If I understand Senator Cruz's explanation, the point that Senator Merkley raised is handled in the Cruz amendment. You use the expanded list, so the only difference is whether we're going to name and shame whoever is altering the content. Is that the substance of the difference?
The difference is my amendment requires a list of what movies have been censored. Senator Merkley's list...
Movies or the entire list that Senator Merkley...
It specifies movies, TV shows and movies, because that's been a persistent problem. Senator Merkley's does not require a list. It says you can give some examples, but it doesn't produce a comprehensive list of where the censorship is occurring.
So the transparency is only on the movies?
I'm more than happy to have a list on anything else as well, but the movies have been the persistent problem.
Senator Merkley. And then I'd like to, I think we've had a robust debate. I'd like to move to a vote. Yeah.
I'm really disagree with the characterization of my colleague. The whole point of this is to get transparency on what China is doing in all sectors and to treat them all effectively, comprehensively, extensive working group, produce the examples of exactly what's happening. My colleague has said, well, let's take one particular area that he wants to amplify. I think that what that does is create a sense that this is being converted from an examination of the offenses of China to an attack on a particular industry in Oregon, in the United States. All of these sectors are going to have transparency in terms of the hotel sector, the airline sector, the retail sector, because we're covering them all. And we're asking the Commission to treat them all in exactly the same fashion, with the same aggressiveness, the same thoroughness, and rather than call out one for this particular list. That is why I disagree with this. We need a comprehensive, equal treatment of all sectors.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote on my amendment.
The gentleman will get his recorded vote. I recognize the desire for transparency. I think the underlying amendment of Senator Merkley does that as the whole bill, as the entirety of his bill. I would just simply believe it is not fair or right to target the film industry, the only real industry singled out in this amendment, in terms of the type of reporting that is sought. I hope it is part of the greater reporting. And if there's no further debate, I'll call up a vote on the Cruz
Second.
Cruz the Cruz amendment to the Merkley amendment. I don't know if it's a first or second degree according to this. Does the senator accept a voice vote, or the senator asked for a recorded vote? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Cardin? No. Mrs. Shaheen? No. Mr. Coons? No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Murphy? No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. King? No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Markey? No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Merkley? No. Mr. Booker?
No.
Mr. Schatz? No. Mr. Van Haan? No. Mr. Risch?
Aye.
Mr. Rubio? Aye. Mr. Johnson? Aye. Mr. Romney? Aye. Mr. Portman? Aye. Mr. Paul? Aye. Mr. Young? Mr. Brasso?
Aye.
Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Rounds? Aye. Mr. Haggerty?
Aye.